The book of Job is considered to be one of the greatest literary works of all time. Job is also one of the most well-known stories and literary characters from the Bible. Even though Job is not an Israelite, nor is the story set in Israelite land. The book addresses questions that plagued humanity since the beginning of time and feel especially relevant today during this global pandemic. Why do people suffer? Why would a good God permit the manifestation of evil, often called the question of theodicy? Why do bad things happen to good people? How do we respond to suffering and to loss? And where is God in all of our suffering? The book of Job, in a nutshell, tells a story of a man from the land of Uz who, while not an Israelite, has an understanding of the Israelite God. Job had a prosperous life, great riches, and a large family. And more importantly, we read, he was blameless and upright in the eyes of God. So blameless and upright, in fact, that the narrative tells us that a character called Satan, or the Hebrew Hasatan, challenges God to put Job through the test, to see if he will still be so upright and good if his fortune is taken away and a lot of bad things happen to him. Hasatan says to take away all his stuff, put him through a world of suffering, and see if then he is so blameless and upright. It's important to note that the literary character of Hasatan, also translated as adversary in the book of Job, is not the Satan or devil that we would read in the New Testament. In this story, Hasatan is a member of God's heavenly court, one who is testing God. God agrees to the challenge. Job loses all of his property, his children, and eventually even his health, dealing with painful sores from head to toe. After unthinkable tragedy befalls Job, his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, meet and comfort him. At least, they try to. They start off just sitting with him for 7 days and nights without saying a word. And in many ways, we could say that this was Job's friends at their best, just being there with him by his side. It's when they start talking and trying to make sense of everything that we get the dialogue that makes up most of the book of Job. Each one of Job's friends tries, in increasing levels of intensity, to get Job to fess up to what he did to deserve all this. From their perspective, he must have done something wrong, right? He must have made God angry in some way. In fact, he must not only have done something wrong, but he must have done it in secret. In their minds, to make things better, he just needs to own up to his wrongdoings to God. Job, getting more irritated with each comment, fires back at each of his friends, saying he did nothing to deserve this. Job also does a lot of complaining. Now, growing up, I would often hear the phrase, the patience of Job, used for someone who seemed to be able to remain calm, reserved, and patient through really bad circumstances. After reading the book of Job, I was sure whoever came up with that phrase didn't actually read the book. Well, Job certainly does have a lot to complain about. Complain he does, offering some classic biblical complaints like, woe to the day I was born, or to his friends, miserable comforters are you, or one of my favorites, even my breath repulses my wife. But in all this complaining, Job never does curse God. Job concedes that God's ways are beyond full human understanding. And after all these increasingly heated exchanges with his friends, God eventually shows up in a whirlwind addressing Job, in essence telling him that he's right, that God's ways cannot be fully understood in human terms. In the final lines of Job, we read, with God first addressing Job's friends, after the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz, my wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now therefore take 7 bulls and 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and offer up for yourselves a burnt offering, and my servant Job shall pray for you. For I will accept his prayer not to deal with you according to your folly, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has done. So Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar went and did what the Lord had told them, and the Lord accepted Job's prayer. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then there came to him all his brothers and sisters, and all who had known him before. They ate bread with him in his house. They showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. And each of them gave him a piece of money and a gold ring. The Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named the first Jemimah, the second Keziah, and the third Karen Hakbuk. And in all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived for 140 years and saw his children and his children's children 4 generations. And Job died old and full of days. And that's it. That's how the book of Job ends. And I admit, I found myself asking, how can a story so classic, told through so many centuries, be considered so great when this was the ending? I mean, sure, the book as a whole addresses so much related to suffering, but there's no real conclusion here. No epilogue, no post-credit scene, no teaser trailer for a sequel. Job 2, the legend continues. When I was in seminary, I had the privilege of getting to work with one of the foremost scholars on the book of Job, Dr. Chuck Melchert. After a semester of detailed and sometimes grueling study of the book, our capstone task was the challenge to write one more final chapter to the book of Job. And that was it. Taking into account all that we read, all that we studied, and all that was shared in class together, we write a final chapter to Job. There were no other instructions given, no specific length or structure, no specific questions to answer, just whatever we felt called to write. What follows is what I'm calling Job chapter 43, told from the perspective of Job many years after the events of the book. Job chapter 43. It's been almost 140 years since the events that forever changed my life. In my late years, I feel compelled to reflect a bit on those events and my life since then. When God came out of that whirlwind, I was certain my days were over. After all that had happened and all the miserable comfort of my friends, I assumed that it was all about to finally come to an end. God had come to take me out of my misery. But to my surprise, it wasn't only the end, but it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. God came and questioned me as to whether I was able to do the things that God could. God asked me to answer him, in which I responded that I was of small account. God continued, and I finished by telling God that I had uttered what I did not understand. Then, to my amazement, my eyes saw God. And not only did I not die, which I had heard from Israelites means certain death if you see God, but after praying for my friends, God gave me twice over what I had before. After taking so much from me and giving me no decipherable answer as to why, God gave me gifts that I never asked for or expected. As I said, in these late years of my life, I feel compelled that I must reflect on these experiences. I can keep silent about these things no more. Since those events, I've thought a lot about my friends and my brothers and sisters. I was so mad at my friends Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar for what a terrible job they did comforting me. Even God backed me up and told them they didn't speak of God what was true, as I had. But as mad as I was at them, And as wrong as they were, they did stay with me during those times that I lost everything. I mean, even my own brothers and sisters only comforted me after the Lord had given me twice what I had before. It was almost as if I was good enough then. Where were they during those times that I really needed the comfort the most? The only people I had during those times were those 3 fools. But those 3 fools stayed by my side. Even as I got more and more angry and caustic with them, they still stayed there. Even when the whirlwind came and God showed up, they still stood by my side. Even when God said that God's wrath was kindled against Eliphaz right to his face, he still stood with me, along with the other 2. I know I irritated Zophar so much, but even he stayed with me. Then, when God instructed them to take 7 bulls and 7 rams, which was a big investment at the time, and offer themselves a burnt offering while I prayed for them, they did so without question. And it was only after I prayed for my friends, miserable comforters as they were, that God restored what I had. It was almost as if after everything that happened, God needed to see my real character. God wanted to see how I would act when I was called upon to do so. I had nothing I could offer anyone. I was totally broke financially. I had no status of any sort. I was a mess to look at, and even my wife was repulsed by my breath. But God showed that I did have one simple yet powerful thing that I could offer: prayer. After all the complaining, I realized that I never really asked God for help for myself, for my wife, for my family, or for anyone really. Sure, if we define prayer as talking to God, I did plenty of that, but I never really asked God for help as much as I was just asking for answers. But in that moment when I asked God, when God asked me to pray, God asked me to pray not for myself, but for others. And not just anyone, but the 3 people that were irritating me the most. But it was in this unselfish act I did on behalf of others that changed everything for me. I couldn't figure it out for the longest time. Why in the world would God make me, of all people, pray for my friends? They were wrong. I was right. God told us that. Yet, I had to be the one to pray for them. But it hit me afterwards that one of the many lessons God taught me was that in those times of immeasurable darkness, we can still pray. And it was in that moment that I prayed for others that things turned around for me. This was mind-blowing. It seemed like a cruel trick at first. I mean, what about me? What about my own self-care? Of all the people in the world at that time, I certainly felt like I had every right to think only of what I was going through. But it was when I shifted my focus to others that I was rewarded. It was when I did what I could, as little as it was, that things turned around. And I always remembered this. And I guess I have to give those 3 friends credit. I still don't know what to make of the young boy Elihu after all these years. They stayed with me. Even my own brothers and sisters were nowhere to be found until I was rich again. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with all that happened. Even though I was blessed with more beautiful children, nothing could replace the ones that were taken away. I still wonder why a God that can do all things would ever let something like that happen. Based on what God told me, I guess it's something I'll never know. I still find myself wondering why all those horrible things happened. And why did they all happen at one time? I also have reflected a lot on the fact that, like my friends, through it all, God was also always present with me. God heard everything I said. God was with me to hear what my 3 friends said as well. And when God came out of the whirlwind, it was really as if God was there all along. I still cry, weep, find myself angry at what happened, even after all this time. Some days are easier than others to have faith. For the longest time, I kept looking over my shoulder, just waiting for the next thing to happen or the axe to fall again. It's taken me a long time to sleep well, and I still don't. It's taken me a long time to stop questioning what I did to deserve what happened to me. I used to question all the time where I went wrong. Surely I must have done something to warrant all that happened to me. But as I've gotten older, I've come to terms more with the idea that sometimes bad things just happen. But through it all, God is present. I'm not alone. We are not alone.